working class elements in Barbados, providing a better deal for casual workers in the public service. That is something which is amazingly striking, because we talked earlier about changing the relationship between people and the land. You're changing now the relationship between people and the institutions that control capital. You're putting people in a better position of security, where they can now go and broker deals for themselves and take responsible roles in the world of finances and see done in their experience and that of their families that which they was unable to have done before. Providing opportunities for small contractors, unlike today's tendency to facilitate the privilege and the big contractors and the narrow interests. And Barbados is faced with this for various reasons and needs to be dealt with. And there were multiple scores of small contractors who benefited during this period. And the development of the small business arena, and the Honourable Member for St. James South, where she speaks, which I'm sure she will speak to that, of which I'm equally sure. And the expansion of the small business players in the domestic market, all that genders a sense of self, all that changes the characterization of poverty, all of that generates employment, all of that speaks to the building of a nation and the building of a people. How do you stop poor people from being poor? You use these mechanisms and others, but the job is not complete, and the journey is not ended. And many of those things for which we hailed Owenatha and his spirit of leadership need to be furthered. The matter of the reversal of gains, the gains of labor, a threat, a danger, which is now a reality, that the gains of labor made over time, some led by the Barbados Labour Party, some led by the Democratic Labour Party, but we are now in a day and in an age when circumstances are such that there are those who take an opportunity to roll back and reverse the gains of labor. And if poor people are to be stopped from being poor, it is incumbent upon us in this day that despite whatever the expediency may be, we do not allow this country to be subjected to a situation where the gains of labor are reversed, which seems to be the tendency today. The whole issue of youth employment, we speak of employment in percentage terms and in a general way, 10%, 11, 12%, or wherever we are today, and we're now way past 12%, but in good times, in quote-unquote good times, we settle for 12 and 11 and 10%, and we speak of unemployment in those broad terms. But when we drill down and we start to look at it from a demographic perspective, and we realize that unemployment among young people, even before COVID, was up to 30%, even before COVID, then you recognize that if we are to stop poor people from being poor, a priority has to be providing for employment among our young people. And they must not be led to a place where they must think that they can aspire only to the cutting of grass or weeding of the road or patching of a hole or even putting up a signpost. That must not be the seal in which they see. Those things must be done. An expedient sometimes would have us accommodate those activities. But I'm saying we have to cast a vision for these young people that is loftier than that and help them to lift their sights to higher ceilings and to let them know that the sky is not the limit. I'm repeating that the sky is not the limit. We need more dignified work for our women, and especially in this era when women are seemingly taking over the leadership in every respect, in several aspects of our life's endeavor as a nation. We need to find opportunity for more dignified work for our women. That's how you stop poor women from being poor. And the scourge of underemployment, historically a problem in Barbados, and it should never be overlooked. Because simply because a fella has a job, it does not mean that he's well remunerated. And it does not mean that the level of remuneration which he enjoys is able to help him meet his cost of living, especially in today's world. And therefore, that underemployment issue has to be addressed if we are going to stop poor people from being poor. And we have to synchronize the offerings of the same university of which we speak with our development goals and the global market opportunities which are being created, the global market dynamics which obtain. We have to adopt land holding policies that empower Bajans. I will not repeat that today, but I spoke to that recently. We have to look at the matter of non-nationals and their power to hold land in Barbados. And we have to look at the whole business of how land is allocated in terms of ownership across Barbados if it is not land being put into productive purposes. And I will come back to that, I am sure, at some time again in my life. It's about nation building. Stopping poor people from being poor is about nation building. Any fundamentals we spoke to, the Honourable Prime Minister spoke to this morning, and fundamentals which were achieved in significant terms under ONAFA, whether it was the lifting of the gross domestic product, whether it was the lifting of our level of foreign reserves to comfortable levels, whether or not it was the matter of building our foreign reserves, etc. These things are important. Reducing the level of employment, broad macro fundamentals, which are very much a part of nation building. But there are other aspects of nation building that cannot be omitted. The establishment or the establishing of institutions which are viable and which are meaningful, which not only facilitate service to Barbadians and visitors to our country, but institutions which are renowned for their levels of transparency, for the integrity that is associated with their functions. This is a type of activity in which the ONAFA administration was engaged. The building up of institutions in Barbados which were credible and which served the interests of the average Barbadian citizen, household, business, and institutions which fitted us for our responsible role in the region and in the world. And that is part of the exercise of stopping poor people from being poor, whether they're political institutions, economic institutions, social institutions, the institutions that we frame as non-governmental institutions. They're all part and parcel of the exercise of nation building. And it is in building a nation institutionally that you help to create the platform for building the nation's people and stopping poor people from being poor. Mr. Arthur was an unapologetic regionalist. He must be hailed for his work with respect to the CARICOM single market and economy. We understand the critical importance of institutions like this. He understood not only from a doctrinal perspective, an institutional, theoretical institutional perspective, he understood it from a functional perspective. The whole business of the rights of establishments, the expansion of market frontiers within the region, the whole business of functional cooperation, if as a nation state, within the context of a region, we were as a people, Caribbean people, to take our place in the world. Mr. Speaker, I believe, I heard a lot of tributes over time, and I was able to read, but one of the best tributes I heard made to Mr. Arthur came from David Simmons. He said something to this effect, that he and Owen saw each other as best political friends. But yet when I made the transition from the political arena to the judiciary and took up my appointment as Chief Justice, he, meaning Owen Arthur, scrupulously kept his distance and did not interfere with any of my decisions or recommendations. That's a glowing testament, Mr. It is hard for the powers that be sometimes to observe the required distance and not to meddle. And he's saying, even though we shared a long-term political friendship, when I moved from the political arena as part of his administration to the judiciary, another branch of government, he scrupulously kept his distance from me, and we hardly talked except in an open, professional manner. This clear testament to the fact, Mr. Speaker, that an intellect of obvious enormity was also attended by a high sense of integrity in the functions of the office of Prime Minister. It is a clear testament of respect for the tenets of democracy and an awareness of the challenges to the practice of separation of powers in our system. Prime Ministers find it very difficult to keep out of meddling in the affairs of other critical institutions. Now, that's a culture, the practice of politics, our system in the Caribbean, and the challenges which the way we practice separation of powers allows for itself or creates for itself. Three branches of government, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, theoretically separate. In our context, hey, the executive sits here with full dominance in the legislature. And if we're not careful, we can find ourselves tempted to interfere in the judiciary. And what Sir David Simmons, I should say, is saying here, there was a man who had respect for the doctrine of separation of powers and who was motivated by the kind of level of integrity that forbade him from interfering with me, despite our friendship, in the pursuit of my functions. There was a poem from which Mr. Arthur would frequently quote, and it's written by Robert Frost, and you're probably familiar. But I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And I heard him often quote that even on the floor of the House. Well, I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. Miles to go before I sleep. The journey now has ended, and over many miles, many promises are being kept by Prime Minister Arthur when he served in that capacity. Sleep now has been reached. Sleep now has been earned. And I believe that rest is fully deserved. And I offer those words in tribute today humbly. Thank you.
Honourable, please turn on the mic.
Mr. Speaker, it is somewhat ironic that I should be here giving a tribute to a Prime Minister who is not the only Prime Minister to have terminated my term as a member of the Cabinet. I would say that I have the dubious distinction of being fired by two Prime Ministers, including Owen Arthur. And the mere fact that I could come and speak in this debate speaks to the measurement of the man. I would also like to say that his measurement can also be determined by the fact that he recognized, before he died, he recognized after that termination that he had made a serious mistake. As a matter of fact, he's on record as having said, if it is one of the worst decisions that he has made, is to have fired me from his cabinet. Of course, the term firing was not used in the past few months. It was more a boxing match, a reshuffle. And, you know, I bear no malice. I still remain a member of the Barbados Labour Party. And unless, for some strange reason, my comments might put me in trouble, I shall so remain. But I would like to say that I will always feel free to make my certain statements. Sometimes what you say and what you do not say can put you in trouble. Sometimes by remaining silent, it can put you in trouble, and by saying too much can also put you in trouble. And I've always had problems with my mouth, in the sense that I keep my mouth shut sometimes when I should speak, and sometimes I speak when I should not. But I believe in the maxim that you should speak, as I said already in these chambers, when you have something to say. But when Arthur set the high standards of leadership, that will not be easily matched. What has not been said by previous speakers, including the first speaker in this debate, is that the standards that he set are standards which should be emulated, and emulated in terms for the future. But I think it is important to understand the background which set the stage for Owenafa's entry as the Prime Minister of this country. I recall in 1994, when in 1991, when the Barbados Labour Party won the government, every member of Parliament, barring the member for St. James North and myself, and to a lesser extent, the member for St. Michael East at the time, Southeast, I think it was, you bear with me, I don't think I'm breaching the rules by calling his name, Delisle Bradshaw. We were the only three persons that were not contenders for the leadership of the party. And when Arthur came to office, at that time, there were persons who felt that there's a certain entitlement that went with the leadership of the Barbados Labour Party, and when Arthur was not qualified. It is true that my own reasons at the time was a little bit personal, because having won an election in St. Andrew against his good friend, a gentleman by the name of Peter Scott, even though I won the election, when Arthur at the time still indicated that he would come to St. Andrew in the next election and canvass against me. So my opposition to his seeking the leadership of the party when the former leader was dethroned, people said he had resigned, was more or less along those lines. But there were 7 contenders at the time for leadership of the party, and if the former Prime Minister, and that was the late Bernard St. John, Sir Harold St. John, who was a member for St. Michael, Christchurch South. If he had his way, he would have continued. If the Honourable member for St. Christchurch West had the support, he probably would have continued. And then you had the badgering by everybody else, myself and the member for St. James North, being the new members of Parliament, it was felt that we could be cajoled in supporting one way or other. It is common knowledge at the time that I could not be really moved, because I had always admired at the time, my political hero at the time was the member for St. George South, the Honourable Louis Tell. So Louis Tell, sorry. And I made no bones when I was being hijacked by the other six. I said, well, I was even hijacked one day. Somebody offered to give me a lift, in the hope that the lift home when something was wrong with my car would result in my support for them. And I made it very, very clear that the only prime minister that I would support, the only leader of the Barbados Labour Party I would support would be Sir Louis Tell. And I suffered for that, but that was my position, and I have always had taken certain positions in this house, in the Barbados Labour Party, and having taken certain positions, I don't veer away from my positions. I believe that when you're elected to the House of Assembly, that you're elected to serve the people, and the question of making deals, the question of someone trying to come to you with some sort of package, that is not in my DNA. So you either don't come, or you say something negative with respect to my position. But that has been my position, and that is my position up to today. And I dare say that that is the environment that surfaced at the time when I came to Parliament, when Owen Arthur achieved the leadership of the Barbados Labour Party. I mean, and there are people even after he was elected who sought to make certain derogatory statements with respect to his I wouldn't like to say extra parliamentary activity. Everybody knew Arthur well, and socially, I don't think that you could have a better person. Sometimes socially, things might get a little out of hand, and in his exuberance and his excitement, especially, it's like going to, if you go to a party and the party, the drinks are flowing, the food is good, the music is good. If the music is good and you're a dancer, you dance. And if you like food, you eat the food. And if you like the drink, you might go a little bit overboard. And there were persons then, even within Parliament, even outside of Parliament, within the leadership of the Barbados Labour Party, who felt that he was not suitable, even after he was elected as leader. And, the feeling was, don't worry, he's not going to last long. We probably might have another leadership contest before the election. And they were veering towards the election that was constitutionally due in 1996. But Owen immediately put a stamp with respect to the leadership of the Barbados Labour Party on the party. And I recall, notwithstanding the little run-ins that we had earlier, a debate in the House of Assembly, we were dealing with national insurance. And I was supposed to be the spokesman in that particular area. And I spoke with respect to the information that I had before me. But to my surprise, while I was, or rather before I gave my presentation, the member for the city, the former member for the city, she had a stack of information. I said, but how comes I'm in charge of this information, and nobody never gave me this information? He says, well, you're new, and you got to learn. You have to make sure you get information by yourself. That is the type of environment that was the Barbados Labour Party in those days. Each man for himself. And I am coming from the same background as Owen Arthur. It pained me to see the attitude of certain persons. I'm not, I hope it is not being critical of those individuals, but it is, when Arthur was the first person from humble origins that ever assumed the leadership of the Barbados Labour Party. And as a result, that is the type of behavior that you would have expected in those days. But there are certain things that come to mind after he became Prime Minister of Barbados. And having had the opportunity of contesting the election under Tom Adams, being there in the Barbados Labour Party under Bree St. John, being serving under Owen Arthur, and thereafter seeing other leaders of the Barbados Labour Party, one has a very good assessment with respect to the caliber and the quality of leadership of these individuals. But one of the things that struck me very, very, very clearly was the way how Owen Arthur allowed his team to chart their path. In 1994, I was chosen as Minister of Housing, Minister of Housing and Public Works, including water, a ministry that after the Democratic Labour Party came into office, took 4 ministers to handle. And, straight away I remembered when Owen Arthur gave me those responsibilities, and I looked at the various areas, I couldn't believe it. How am I going to handle these particular portfolios? And I remember Owen Arthur said to me, well, George, I have studied your background. You've been involved in community activity for a number of years. And one of the things that you're good at is you have to learn to delegate. And you know how to do that. And, I was blessed, to be honest with you, with good chairmen of statutory boards, including the member for St. Joseph, including the member for the present Minister of Foreign Affairs, persons of that caliber. And I didn't have, I'm not no reflection on the minister, the former minister responsible for water, having to go on television, having to speak to the water problems. We had competent chairmen of boards, and you had a competent engineer in Mr. Dennis Yearwood. And we had no issues in none of these areas. The statutory boards, the chairman of the National Housing Corporation at the time, the member for St. Joseph, I didn't have to know what was going on, because as the Prime Minister told me, you have to know how to delegate, and you have to make sure you have good people. And the thing about it is that we had to come up with a plan, and I had my own team in housing, a plan for dealing with housing. At no occasion during that full term that I was Minister of Housing, on no occasion did Owen Arthur come to tell me exactly what chart I should take with respect to the ministry. The manifesto was there, very clear. You follow the manifesto, the policies are set out in the manifesto. And it was a tough task for us. I recall the utilization of the Housing Credit Fund, the General Workers Loan Fund, meeting with the officers in the Ministry of Finance with respect to the bond issue, the $50 million bond issue, meeting with the banks with respect to the 100% mortgage. All of us, this was done by us. And I remember one day after being in office for about a year, I don't know if the member for St. Joseph could recall, but we got a meeting we got a call we were summoned to a meeting by the Prime Minister. And to be honest with you, I was trembling in my boots, because that was the first time that the Prime Minister had ever called us with respect to what was going on in the ministry. I'm only saying this to show you how much confidence he had in the persons who he had put in the respective ministries, and there was absolutely no interference whatsoever. And I remember trembling, and Mr. Marshall, who I've known from his student days at Combermere, we went up, and he himself was trembling. We were wondering, what could the Prime Minister be summoning us to this meeting for? And I remember we came in and sat down, and he pointed his finger. He says, George, and we had just done some acquisitions in certain parts all over the island. And he said, point his finger. He said, George, I understand that I could see that you all are going on a housing program, and I like the program, but remember, do not forget the people in St. Peter. That is all. I mean, and I felt so relieved. So relieved. And that was the measure of the man. And if it is one thing I can remember him for, it is that sort of confidence that he placed in the persons under his charge. And that confidence also extended towards his elevation to the office of Prime Minister. Notwithstanding the fact that he had all of these things going against him, with everybody ganging up to be the leader of the Barbados Labour Party at the time when he became leader. Once he assumed the leadership, he knew that he was leader. There was not a question of his feeling insecure, of his trying to ascertain who his enemies within the Barbados Labour Party were. And I think that it was a good lesson to us in that style of leadership, that he himself was confident in his position, and he made us confident in ours. The other thing, he surrounded himself. Now, there are some leaders, there are some leaders, some leadership styles. The Trump leadership style is to surround yourself with people of the same view as you. So that you see the debate now in the House, I mean in the United States with respect to the selection of a new judge. If Trump could have had people thinking the way, enough senators thinking in the way he thinks, he would have his way. And the thing about Trump is that if he selects someone and they are not a person who thinks along his line, they're fired. That is one style of leader. When Arthur felt at the time that he should be able to avail himself of good, rich, solid talent, even though he might not even know the individuals. Remember for St. Joseph, classic example, the present president of the Senate, former High Commissioner in Canada, individuals that the Prime Minister did not even know before the election. He was not concerned with persons of his own view. He was concerned with getting the job done and the best talent. And that spoke to the measure of the man. A lot of talk has been made. Even I myself was a little baffled and taken aback by the Prime Minister's comment when he decided to resign from the Barbados Labour Party. I was somewhat disappointed because I don't want to rehash the events of 2010, because I believe that period was more or less a watershed in the history of the Barbados Labour Party. we did what we felt we had to do in 2010. And I believe if those same circumstances are repeated, the same thing could happen again. Same thing could happen again. But I felt a little uncomfortable when Ornafa made the statement that the Barbados Labour Party has lost its soul. But you have to understand, Owen Arthur was a Barbados Labour Party supporter to the bone. Owen Arthur subscribed to the ideals, the principles of the founding fathers of this party. Sir Grantley Adams, Tom Adams, Sir Harold St. John, Henry Ford. And he feared. Some of us have a way of making comments at times without thinking them through. And you know, somebody made a reference to something Owen said when he got a little rattled. And that was Owen Arthur. The Barbados Labour Party has lost its soul. But Owen Arthur made their comments within the context of his fear that those ideals of the founding fathers, which had seen someone from poor, humble background, becoming prime minister of this country, had gone into the dustbin. Owen Arthur did not want to see himself as being the first person from humble origins, being the last person from humble origins, becoming prime minister of this country. And he made those comments within that context. He didn't make, it was not a personal comment. He didn't make those comments as if to undermine the Barbados Labour Party, which a party that had put him in the position, the highest position in the land. That was not the Owen Arthur that I knew. And Owen Arthur believed in those principles, the founding fathers. And Owen Arthur, up to his death, was concerned that those ideals were being treaded upon. And as if to underscore what I'm saying, Owen Arthur, coming from those humble backgrounds, he sought to uplift persons who came from the same background that he came from. He had a desire to see those persons improve their standard of life. And he was, I guess to say that he was impressed would not be a good word to put it, but he lived by what informed the measures, the principles that were enshrined, or that informed the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, and which gave persons like his own family, his own relatives, the right to own the spot of land to which, in many ways, they were entitled for centuries. And as a result of that, his own visions, he had a vision mirroring the achievements of the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. A graduate, his own vision, to see a graduate in every household. To have a regime whereby every single Barbadian has a right to shelter. Now, there was some controversy or some comments at the various United Nations meetings on housing and shelter with respect to the right of every individual to shelter. A right of every individual to own their own homes. And notwithstanding the fact that this is not enshrined in our Constitution, Queen Arthur felt that we should create that environment. And what a lot of people did not know, I recall the days, the honourable member for St. George North is not here. The days, he's here. The honourable member for St. George, the days when he, as the junior minister of housing, when I, as minister of housing, incurred a lot of attacks from the Democratic Labour Party and certain elements of Barbadian public, including persons who were owners of land that was acquired by government, when we went, you could say we went on a rampage to create a land bank to ensure that we have enough land that every single person in Barbados, we had certain plans, and we had discussed this with Owen Arthur, and he was excited about it. And that land bank was created to ensure that at least we give certain people certain hope. Now, you would heard me speak in this house with respect to lands that have been acquired by government for poor people, people who have been ravaged, been affected by the ravages of nature, people who cannot afford to buy land at $5 a square foot, and people who live on the periphery of existing villages where there is no such opportunity available for them to own land. And that is what informed our decision to acquire lands in order to achieve the dream of Owen Arthur, because we had a lot of in-depth discussions really about this. And I must say that I believe this is a dream that former Prime Minister, the Right Excellent Errol Barrow also had. Because when you look at the landscape in the one state area and the lands that were acquired, it was an ambitious plan. And it was a pity that we did not use the opportunity to even go a little further, notwithstanding the fact that we were not sort of cowed by any of the comments which indicated that we were going too far. As minister, I got a lot of calls from a lot of landowners. I was even threatened. Never made it public. Never made it public. But I must say that it pains me now when there are lands which have been acquired for persons, and I like to speak about Whitehill all the time in this house, because there are a number of persons, my members of parliament don't understand that there is a place in Barbados named Whitehill. It is like a village that has been neglected. It is not part of Barbados. It is a place that has been more or less segregated from the rest of Barbados. A place that people live daily without water, without transportation, without proper housing. Where people live, there were two young ladies who were living under a galvanized, 2 and 3 galvanized, which my branch replaced on a few occasions. And people don't understand that. But that is what informed a lot of the decisions which we took. And I must say that after the last election, I am a little disappointed that we took on the problems of the individuals of what transpired in Whitehill, which to a large extent accounted for our 30-30 love victory. And never once since the election have we gone back to Whitehill in order to analyze the problems of that particular area. And as I said, that is why I am pained by the fact that we can now, despite the position that we took, we can now go back to the same Lancaster, whether it is in the terms of a land fair or whatever, and speak about and involve the whole of Barbados on lands that are rightfully owned by the people in White Hill. And we could continue the policies of the last government, the Democratic Labour Party government, that wicked government that never ever had the people, the interests of the people at heart. And we could have an all-day land fair to give away, literally give away the lands. You go back to the debates. You go back to the debates where there was Minister of Housing, why the land in Lancaster was acquired. It was acquired for the people in White Hill, for the people who were affected by the ravages of nature, for the people who could acquire lands at $5 a square foot, and be simply for a photo op, to have a land fair. I mean, at least the same land that was acquired by Shafet, the land that really rightfully belonged to the poor people in White Hill. At least we were not responsible for Shafet. That was the Democratic Labour Party. But we should have taken a lesson. We should have taken a lesson from that. But no, we have not taken that lesson. I think Owen Arthur would be turning in his grave, or rather is probably turning in his grave, when he realized it was a policy of the Ministry of Housing, but it's a policy that was influenced by Owen Arthur. Do not allow those rich people, because there's certain, you know that, Mr. Speaker, you know that there's certain language you use in the trenches that you don't use in certain circles. Don't allow those rich people to come and take over your land. This land belongs to the people in White Hill. This land belongs to the poor people. But the last Democratic Party administration changed all that. Because Owen Arthur wanted to create an environment, and one of the best speeches that the Honourable Member for the Leader of the Opposition ever made in this House, he made today. And he probably didn't even realize it. Because Owen Arthur wanted everybody to be able, every person in this country, to be able to own a piece of the rock. A piece of the rock. And the only reason why we did not go further with respect to the acquisitions of Lancaster and farmers on the other side is because in one respect, I was a little fearful that he would say, well, look, George, you're going too far. And no, I haven't finished yet. Not by my watch. That he probably would have said, you're going too far, and then the same landowners who were chastising myself and the other members in George North for those acquisitions would have been on our backs. But Owen Arthur would be turning in his grave right now. I mean, to see what is happening, and you are selling the same lands that was literally to be given to those people at $15 a square foot. Because what you are doing is that you have taken over. You've taken over. A government has changed. But the government was not. The government was changed. The government was changed on the 24th of May. 24th of May in 2018. The government was not changed when it was removed from the Ministry of Housing. I don't know how to explain certain things to my constituents. I wouldn't know how to explain certain things to Owen Arthur if he came back to his grave. From his grave, sorry. I don't know. It is hurtful to see that he passed and he left us at a time when something like this is happening. You said that I have 2 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I don't know how we could sort of consume the rest of what I would have to say in 2 minutes. But among the other things that the former Prime Minister Arthur, was close to his heart, the eradication of poverty. When he lectured to us on the eradication of poverty, I mean, sometimes you ask yourself, well, this man, he's crazy. Because, I mean, how could you eradicate poverty? But he figured that by putting that on the table, at least there are a number of things we could do. And one we could do in order to alleviate the plight of the least privileged in our society. The eradication of toilets. The acquisition of derelict buildings. And the zero unemployment. Because he always felt if he set the bar that high, and you even fall below. Somebody spoke about unemployment today at 6%. But he figured he would not even have accepted the 6% if everything was going in the right direction. Zero unemployment was what he would have wanted. And the other thing that characterized his tenure as Prime Minister is his utilization of what, in terms of consultation, the elders of the Barbados Labour Party. I don't think that we have made good use of those elders of the Barbados Labour Party is coming to certain decisions. Owen Arthur, before certain decisions are taken, even if you don't agree with them, the elders of the Labour Party, consultations. Now, this whole question of legacy, Mr. Speaker, and bear with me, just a few seconds with respect to this point, the legacy. You know, if you are a person that have done well in business, at the end of the day, you want to leave X amount of property to this child and that child. But this is, you have done your best to build up an empire, and you're at a stage where you can now decide that I'm going to give Tom this particular property, Jack this and Jack that. But you did not set out at the onset that your legacy will be that amount. And I think that this is what separates Owen Arthur from other leaders. In that the legacy of a prime minister is different to the legacy of an individual who has built up an empire. But it would appear as though the legacy of a prime minister has suddenly changed, shifted somewhat. In that you have prime ministers now who before they could even get a grip on the management of the country, wants to place things in their legacy. That will not be their legacy when they have left the minute office. And the thing about legacy for a prime minister is not determined by him. It is determined by the historians. It will be determined by those persons who will have to evaluate his stewardship. In this respect, we can look at the legacy of Owen Arthur and we can say that has been a rich legacy. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry that I had to terminate my presentation halfway, but I could understand you're under certain strictures with respect to time. Thank you. Okay.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2:30 p.m.
Seconded.
Eh?
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 2:30 p.m. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 2:30 p.m.